Alexander Black. Alexander Black had long been a name spoken in hushed tones across the rain-slicked streets of modern London, a name forever bound to a night of irrevocable violence and sorrow. It was said that even the chill of an autumn breeze carried echoes of that fateful evening on the banks of the Thames. Born into a troubled childhood amid the grime and grit of East London, Alexander's early years were marked by neglect, bitter abandonment, and an unending cascade of misfortune. Even as a young boy, his eyes bore the haunted look of one who had seen too much, felt too deeply the sting of loss and betrayal. As he grew older, Alexander found himself drawn into a dark underworld, a place where grievances festered and actions, however drastic, became the language of survival. In the murky corners of Camden and along the narrow alleys of Peckham, he encountered characters whose lives were as broken as his own. It was in these shadowed environs that he forged bonds with men and women whose fates were entwined with secrets, despair, and rage. The defining moment came on a bleak November night. The rain fell in relentless sheets as Alexander faced a crossroads, one that would forever sever his ties to any semblance of an ordinary life. Overwhelmed by betrayal and loss, he committed an act of violence that would mark him as a convicted murderer. In the dim glow of a street lamp near the Thames, the sound of a single, fateful shot punctuated the heavy air. Time seemed to slow as he watched a life slip away, and the heavy burden of guilt and irrevocable consequence settled upon him like a shroud. In the days that followed, investigative officers like Detective Oliver Grant combed through the twisting alleys and murky corridors of Alexander's past. "We are not merely piecing together a case," Detective Grant would later assert in a somber interview, but trying to understand the cascade of events that led to that tragic moment. In the sterile courtroom of the Old Bailey, where every word carried the weight of justice, Alexander's fate was sealed with a verdict delivered with austere finality by Judge William Thompson. "Your path has been chosen by your own hands, Mr. Black," declared the judge with a measured tone that mingled stern resolve with quiet pity. Alexander's reply was soft, measured, almost as if he were reciting a long-remembered prayer: "I accept the darkness that has come to define me." Within the penitentiary walls, where days blurred into endless nights and remorse was etched in every worn corridor, Alexander found himself amongst others similarly condemned. Among them was Samuel Hartley, a quiet man whose haunted eyes betrayed an inner battle against a legacy of violence. In hushed tones during group sessions, Samuel once confided, "We are all prisoners of our own regrets. Every act of cruelty leaves behind a mark no time can erase." Alexander, listening intently, would occasionally echo, "I have made choices I can never forget, and yet, in every shadow, I search for a glimmer of redemption." Within the cold, oppressive cells, dialogue between the inmates became a sort of therapy. Over time, Alexander came to understand that while guilt was an unyielding shackle, reflection might yet lead to the faintest possibility of change. In one session with the prison psychologist Dr. Henry Lawson, a man with years of experience listening to the confessions of broken souls, Alexander was asked, "Tell me, Alexander, what do you remember of your childhood?" His voice faltered as he recalled, "I remember a constant storm, an unrelenting chaos that stole my innocence and left me desperate for a place to belong." Dr. Lawson's calm voice reassured him, "Only by facing your past can you hope to find a way beyond it." The nights in the prison were long and haunted by ghostly memories. Alexander would sometimes retreat to the solitude of his cell and whisper silent apologies to the cold walls. "I am sorry," he murmured into the darkness, words that hung in the still air, a testament to the secret remorse of a hardened soul. Outside, modern London marched on unaware. The neon glow of busy streets and the relentless hum of a city fueled by ambition contrasted starkly with the grim realities of life behind bars. Yet, even as the metropolis evolved with futuristic trams and digital billboards, the moral questions raised by Alexander's case remained as unresolved as ever. In one television interview with Stephen Carter, a young and determined journalist, Alexander reflected, "I cannot erase my past. I can only hope that by sharing my story, someone may learn from the darkness I once embraced." Carter's probing questions the ethics of punishment, the possibility of true rehabilitation sparked debates that rippled through the corridors of public opinion and academia alike. On another brisk afternoon at a reform conference held in Manchester, a city steeped in industrial heritage and modern resilience, Alexander's narrative found an unexpected audience. Alongside him was Richard Wheeler, another convicted murderer whose story was equally complex and riddled with moral ambiguity. In a moment of stark candor, Wheeler declared, "We are not simply the sum of our worst moments. What we become afterwards is defined by our choices to seek change." When questioned by a skeptical observer, Wheeler's voice trembled with a mix of bitterness and hope as he added, "Redemption isn't about forgetting the blood on your hands, it's about learning how to carry that weight with dignity." The dialogue between these two men, once lost souls, now unintentional spokespersons for a battered justice system, became a focal point for discussions on the potential for human transformation. Deep in the recesses of the prison's library, Alexander began to journal his thoughts, capturing every flicker of introspection, every painful recollection of a past that could never be undone. His entries recounted memories of a life once filled with promise, a childhood brimming with the potential for love and creativity before circumstances forced him onto a path of destruction. "I write not to absolve myself," he penned in one entry, "but to serve as a reminder that even the darkest soul bears a weight of humanity that can one day seek understanding." In private moments during the daily routine of prison life, Alexander would engage in long, philosophical discussions with inmates and even with the dedicated staff who oversaw rehabilitation programs. During these exchanges, he questioned the nature of justice and retribution. "Is it our place to cast judgment on those who made unthinkable choices under unbearable circumstances?" he asked one rainy afternoon while speaking with Warden Collins, a man known for his balanced views on punishment. "Every choice carries a cost," Collins replied gently, "but in recognizing that cost, perhaps we can chart a course that prevents further tragedy." Such conversations were a lifeline to Alexander, reaffirming that even behind the high walls of punishment, the human spirit might find a way to redefine itself. Time passed, and the weight of infamy began to give way, if only slightly, to the slow process of introspection. Alexander found that speaking honestly about his past with its unspeakable horrors and deep-seated regrets provided him with fleeting moments of clarity. In one particularly poignant exchange with Samuel Hartley during a shared mealtime in the mess hall, Samuel remarked, "Do you ever think that if we had been given a different chance, our lives might have taken another course?" Alexander's eyes, dark and searching, met Samuel's as he responded softly, "I think all roads lead us to where we are meant to be. Perhaps my destiny was never to walk a path of light, but rather to show others that even in the deepest shadows, there is a small, stubborn spark that yearns to be free." The eerie quiet of the prison yard on a foggy morning was punctuated by murmurs of hope and despair. Outside the iron bars, life in London continued unabated. The cobblestones of Covent Garden had witnessed centuries of drama and passion, while the soaring modernity of the city's skyline offered little comfort to those condemned by their past. Amid the bustle of everyday existence, protests erupted from time to time, driven by citizens who believed that the justice system had grown too lenient on violent criminals. "Our society must not forget the lives shattered by these heinous acts," an enraged demonstrator once shouted at a public rally, his voice drowning beneath the roar of the crowd. Yet, even amidst this fervor, many found themselves pondering the possibility that every human being, no matter how broken, might one day find a path towards redemption. One rain-soaked day, during a rare visitation, Detective Oliver Grant returned to face Alexander one final time. The sterile room of the visiting area was heavy with unspoken truths. "We have uncovered new details, remnants of evidence that suggest there were layers to your case that remain unexplored," Detective Grant stated, his tone neither accusatory nor condescending, but filled with a cautious curiosity. Alexander, his face weathered by years of isolation and regret, merely nodded. "I have long come to accept the darkness that is part of my story," he answered slowly, "but if there is more truth to be found, then let it be unearthed. I have nothing to hide except the secrets of my own despair." The conversation ebbed and flowed like the tide of the Thames, both men caught in the relentless pursuit of understanding a past that could not be rewritten. In a twist of fate, Alexander soon found himself at the center of a broader societal debate. As legal experts, sociologists, and media personalities dissected his case, his story emerged as a metaphor for a failing system in a fractured society. At a televised forum on criminal justice reform held in a grand but somber auditorium in Birmingham, Alexander spoke with measured resolve. "I am not here to seek pity," he declared, his voice firm as he addressed both the live audience and the millions watching at home. "I am here to illustrate that every act of violence is not an isolated event, but part of a continuum that reflects on how our society treats pain, suffering, and redemption." The audience fell silent, the significance of his words reverberating through the cavernous space. After the forum, as Alexander navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the courthouse to attend another hearing related to the cold case connected to his past, he encountered Jonathan Phillips, a young man whose eyes were rife with regret and a desperate plea for guidance. Jonathan's voice cracked as he confessed, "I have made mistakes, some that I fear will define my entire future. Listening to you, I have come to understand that perhaps there is a way to change." Alexander placed a steady hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "Redemption is not granted, it is earned, step by painful step. Do not allow your past to be your prison. Use these scars as a reminder of what you must overcome." Their quiet conversation in the shadow of the towering courthouse served as a stark reminder that even in the depths of despair, the human spirit can reach out and grasp hope. Within the walls of the correctional facility, workshops and group therapy sessions became unlikely venues for transformation. Alexander took part in art therapy classes where his sketches' raw depictions of inner turmoil and shattered innocence spoke volumes about the unseen battles raging within. In one session, as he sketched a river flowing under a bridge in twilight, a fellow inmate, Richard Wheeler, remarked, "Your art seems to capture a yearning for something lost forever." Alexander replied quietly, "It is the only way I can articulate the endless conflict between what I have done and what I aspire to be." Their dialogue, though sparse, revealed the deep fissures in their souls, each man silently questioning whether the monstrous acts of their past might someday lead to a dawn of understanding. Not all moments within the prison were filled with introspection. There were times of bitter humor and fleeting camaraderie when, for a brief moment, laughter echoed down the cold corridors. During one such rare interlude in the mess hall, a conversation arose about the randomness of life. "We are like actors on a stage, forced to recite lines of regret and salvation," quipped Samuel, his eyes twinkling in a rare moment of levity. Alexander joined in with a soft chuckle, adding, "And yet, perhaps our greatest performance is our ability to change the script, even if for just a moment." The moment of shared humor was brief, but it bridged the chasm between hardened criminals and fragile men struggling to hold on to some semblance of humanity. Outside, in the ever-evolving landscape of modern London, debates raged on policy, punishment, and the possibility of rehabilitation. Academics penned articles critiquing the system that had once seen Alexander Black as nothing more than a monstrous aberration. A man's violent act, however unforgivable, is often the culmination of a lifetime of forgotten traumas and denied compassion, argued a renowned sociologist in a widely circulated journal. In a parallel narrative, reform advocates held rallies demanding more humane incarceration policies and better psychological support for those on the fringes of society. The tensions of these debates spilled over into everyday conversations in coffee shops near King's Cross Station, where patrons discussed the limits of justice over steaming cups of tea. As the years passed, Alexander's transformation became more pronounced. Though the stain of his past would never fully vanish, he gradually emerged as a reluctant mentor to those who, like him, had once lost their way. In letters that he painstakingly composed for inmates and even for those on the outside, people seeking a path away from the violent allure of a doomed destiny, Alexander wrote, "May my mistakes be a guide to save you from the same unforgivable depths. I cannot undo what has been done, but I can hope that my words prevent another soul from reaching that point of no return." His writing, raw and unfiltered, was met with both admiration and skepticism, yet it invariably sparked reflection on the nature of sin and the possibility of atonement. In a final twist of fate, the reopening of the investigation into his original case forced Alexander and several of his fellow inmates to confront evidence that had long been buried. Detective Grant, revisiting old files and revising witness statements, announced in a discreet meeting with prosecuting officials, "There are aspects to this case that we never fully understood. It seems that the reality of that tragic night was even more complex than we presumed." In the quiet tension that followed, Alexander's voice was barely audible as he said, "I have carried the burden of that night for too long. If there is any truth to be found, let it come to light." His words, spoken with a mixture of resignation and steely determination, sent ripples through the minds of those seeking justice. In a subsequent series of interviews streamed live from the courthouse, Alexander engaged with viewers from all over the country. Stephen Carter, ever the probing journalist, asked, "Mr. Black, do you ever dream of a life beyond this cell?" With a long, measured pause, Alexander replied, "Every day I imagine a world where my past does not define who I am. I do not ask for forgiveness, for I know some wounds never fully heal. I only ask that my journey may serve as a warning and perhaps, a small beacon for those teetering on the edge of darkness." Such public declarations stirred a maelstrom of opinions, forcing society at large to confront its own capacity for both judgment and compassion. Amid the unfolding drama inside the correctional facility, a personal transformation took root in Alexander's heart. The endless cycle of guilt and introspection slowly gave way to a grudging acceptance of responsibilities, a recognition that his story might indeed hold a message of caution and rebirth for others. One rainy evening, as the relentless patter of water against barred windows created a somber symphony, he wrote in his journal, "Redemption is not a gift freely given, it is a burden we choose to bear, a slow, arduous path paved with the lessons of our darkest moments." Even as controversies roiled the public sphere, with impassioned debates about the ethics of incarceration and the treatment of violent offenders, Alexander's voice became that of a somber oracle. At a round-table discussion on reform, attended by legal experts, prison officials, and former inmates, he observed quietly, "We all live in a world that is imperfect, where every decision, no matter how small, can lead to a cascade of forever-altering events. I stand here not as a hero or as a monster, but as a man bound to the consequences of a life once defined by a single, fateful act." His measured words, delivered with stark honesty, resonated through the room as a reminder that even amidst darkness, there existed the possibility of transformation. At times, the burden of his convictions weighed heavily on Alexander, and his solitary walks around the prison yard became ritualistic acts of remembrance and internal reconciliation. One particularly gray morning, as he sat on a cold stone bench under the sparse shade of a scraggly tree, he recalled the night of the killing. The distant murmur of the Thames provided a mournful counterpoint to his racing thoughts. "I remember every cry, every desperate plea echoing in my mind," he reflected silently. "But the past is unchangeable, and I must learn to accept the fragments of it that remain." In that moment of solitude, the boundaries between guilt and redemption seemed to blur, leaving him with nothing but the quiet acceptance of a life irrevocably altered. As public sentiment ebbed and flowed, Alexander began to receive letters from across the country, letters from people who found in his story a mirror to their own struggles, pain, and hope. One letter, in particular, stood out. Penned by a young man named Michael who had once tread a dangerous path, the note read, "Your words, though born from deep regret, have given me a reason to believe that even in my darkest moments, there is a chance for change." Alexander's heart ached at the realization that even his tortured past might serve as a catalyst for others to reconsider their choices. With quiet resolve, he replied, "I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but if my journey can help save another soul from succumbing to perpetual darkness, then every painful step I took will not have been in vain." In the final analysis, Alexander Black's life was a tapestry of shattered moments and tentative repair, a continuous narrative that stretched from the most agonizing depths of human cruelty to the fragile hope of eventual redemption. His story, interwoven with those of countless others like Richard Wheeler and Samuel Hartley, laid bare the complexities of fate, choice, and the eternal struggle between the forces of destruction and the yearning for salvation. The modern world outside his cell continued its inexorable march, indifferent to the lives caught in its shadows. Yet, within the cold, confining walls of his incarceration, Alexander nurtured the belief that even a condemned soul might find a path to a kind of inner light. His whispered apologies in the stillness of twilight, his candid dialogues with fellow inmates, and his brave public pronouncements all converged to create a cautionary tale, a story not simply of murder, but of the potential for human transformation in the face of overwhelming darkness. And so, as the grey light of dawn crept into the prison yard one last time before another long day began, Alexander Black sat quietly and contemplated the long road behind him, a road marked by irreversible acts, painful memories, and small, unsteady steps toward the possibility of redemption. In his heart, he carried both the irrevocable weight of sin and the fragile hope that, through understanding and hard-won wisdom, even the most shattered individuals could someday contribute to something greater than themselves. This is a fictional tale and not based on actual events. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to my channel, like, and check the description to find out how you can support my work.